These are four master con artists who convinced thousands of people to buy entire cities, bridges, and towers that they never owned, and in some cases that did not even exist. From fake suicide notes on Florida beaches to selling the Eiffel Tower twice, these scammers pulled off some of the most audacious real estate frauds in history, stealing millions and leaving behind ghost towns that still haunt America today. Let's start with Charles Ponzi, the man whose name became synonymous with pyramid schemes. But before his famous postal stamp scam collapsed in 1920, Ponzi had one more trick up his sleeve. In September 1925, he launched the Charpon Land Syndicate, promising investors prime Florida real estate. What he was actually selling was 100 acres of worthless swampland east of Jacksonville that he had bought for just $16 an acre. Ponzi's timing was perfect. The Florida land boom was in full swing and everyone wanted a piece of the Sunshine State dream. He marketed his swampland as prime development property, complete with elaborate brochures showing beautiful subdivisions and promising massive returns. Thousands of investors sent money sight unseen, dreaming of their piece of paradise. When authorities started closing in, Ponzi did something extraordinary. He faked his own death. His clothes were found on a Florida beach along with a suicide note apologizing to his wife and mother. But Ponzi was very much alive. He had shaved his head, grown a mustache, and was working as a dishwasher on an Italian freighter in Tampa, planning his escape. The ruse did not last long. Ponzi was indicted by a Duval County grand jury in February 1926 for violating Florida trust and securities laws. After serving his time and being deported to Italy, he eventually made his way to Brazil, where he died penniless in a charity ward in Rio de Janeiro in 1949. His Florida swampland scam had netted him hundreds of thousands of dollars, but like his postal scheme, it all came crashing down. While Ponzi was selling swampland in Florida, George C. Parker was busy selling some of New York's most famous landmarks to unsuspecting immigrants. Parker's specialty was the Brooklyn Bridge, which he sold dozens of times starting in the 1880s. But he did not stop there. Throughout his criminal career, he also sold the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Parker's victims were primarily new immigrants who did not speak English well and did not understand American property laws. He would approach them near Ellis Island or in immigrant neighborhoods, carrying official-looking documents and wearing a sheriff's badge. He would spin elaborate tales about needing to sell these landmarks quickly due to financial troubles or government regulations. The scam was so convincing that many victims would immediately try to recoup their investment by setting up toll booths on the Brooklyn Bridge. Police would have to remove these confused new Americans who thought they had legitimately purchased one of the city's most important structures. The problem became so widespread that processors at Ellis Island started handing out warning cards to new arrivals stating that you cannot buy public buildings or streets. Parker's criminal career finally ended in 1928 when Judge Alonzo McLaughlin sentenced him to a mandatory life term in Sing Sing prison. But even then, Parker showed his cunning. Before court proceedings began, he calmly walked out of the courthouse wearing a sheriff's cap and coat that he had taken from the actual sheriff. He was recaptured shortly after and died in Sing Sing in 1937. His Brooklyn Bridge con was so famous that it gave birth to the American phrase, "If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you." Meanwhile, in the Midwest, Oscar Hartzell was running perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated scam of all. In 1915, two con men approached the 40-year-old broke farmer with an incredible story. They claimed that Sir Francis Drake, the famous English explorer, had left behind a massive inheritance worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and that Hartzell could be the rightful heir. Hartzell bought into the scam initially as a victim, but then realized he could become the orchestrator. He founded the Sir Francis Drake Association and convinced thousands of people, particularly in rural Iowa, that they could buy shares in this mythical inheritance. For over 15 years, he collected money from believers who thought they were investing in a legitimate legal claim to one of history's greatest fortunes. The psychological manipulation was extraordinary. Hartzell positioned himself as a crusader fighting against the British establishment, claiming that lawyers and bankers were conspiring to keep Drake's rightful heirs from their inheritance. He told followers that he was personally traveling to England to fight court battles on their behalf. Many families mortgaged their farms and sent their life savings to support what they believed was a noble cause. When Hartzell was finally tried in Sioux City, Iowa in 1933, the scale of the fraud became clear. He had swindled at least $2 million from his victims, which equals over $37 million today. Even after his conviction in November 1934 and a 10-year prison sentence, his followers refused to believe he was a criminal. They sent him $68,000 for his defense and continued collecting donations even after his sentencing, raising another $500,000 the following year. Perhaps the most audacious scammer of all was Victor Lustig, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. In 1925, while staying in Paris, Lustig read a newspaper article about the expensive maintenance problems facing the Eiffel Tower. This gave him an inspired idea for what would become one of history's greatest cons. Lustig forged official French government letterhead and sent invitations to 6 of Paris's biggest scrap metal dealers. He told them the government had decided to secretly demolish the Eiffel Tower due to maintenance costs and was accepting sealed bids for the scrap metal. The meeting was held at the prestigious Hôtel de Crillon, where Lustig, posing as a government official, conducted a site visit to the tower with the potential buyers. The con was sophisticated enough that one dealer, André Poisson, actually won the auction and paid Lustig a substantial sum for the rights to dismantle the Eiffel Tower. But Lustig was not finished. When Poisson realized he had been scammed but was too embarrassed to report it to police, Lustig returned to Paris a month later and sold the tower again to a different scrap dealer. Secret Service agents later described Lustig as elusive as a puff of cigarette smoke and charming as a young girl's dream. He was finally captured in 1935 after masterminding a counterfeiting operation so vast that it threatened to shake confidence in the American economy. A judge sentenced him to 20 years in Alcatraz, where he reportedly kept a postcard of the Eiffel Tower on his cell wall with the words "sold for 100,000 francs" written across it. These individual scams were part of a much larger phenomenon that peaked during Florida's golden age of land fraud in the 1950s and 1960s. Companies like Gulf American Land Corporation and General Development Corporation sold hundreds of thousands of lots in non-existent communities. The city of Poinciana was advertised as a future Miami of the Gulf Coast, complete with banana, orange, lime, and coconut plants supposedly left over from Spanish settlements. In reality, most of the 9,000 lots sold were located in impassable mangrove swamps. The legacy of these scams still haunts America today. Drive through places like Lehigh Acres, Florida, and you will pass through what has been called the world's largest ghost town. Endless empty lots that were sold to families who never got to build their dream homes. The FBI reports that vacant land fraud has increased by 500% over the last 4 years, with modern scammers using artificial intelligence and electronic communications to impersonate property owners and sell land they do not own. These master con artists understood something fundamental about human nature: our willingness to believe in dreams that seem too good to be true. Whether it was Ponzi's Florida paradise, Parker's ownership of American landmarks, Hartzell's mythical inheritance, or Lustig's government connections, each scammer tapped into their victims' deepest desires for wealth, belonging, and opportunity. Their methods may seem crude by today's standards, but their psychological insights remain timeless. They knew that the biggest con is not about fake documents or elaborate props. It is about selling people the story they desperately want to believe.